Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there, on the fact that you're not actually there, and this intro is stupid. But don't mind me though, I'm just sitting here enjoying a nice game on my Nintendo Switch. You know, I've spent the past 5 years of my life with this Nintendo Switch, and you wanna know what my favorite part about it is? Obviously, it's gotta be the mediocre and outdated hardware, the numerous issues with said hardware with no easy way to fix it, the lack of any virtual console, the fact that you have your online play and cloud saves locked behind some shitty paywall, and the upgrade you get that only gets you 2 shoddy emulators and a bunch of DLC that goes away the second you stop paying your sub. Just to name a few things. Now, I'm aware that comparing the Steam Deck to the Nintendo Switch really isn't anything new. I'm just the next in a long line of mediocre online reviewers that are drawing surface-level comparisons to two devices that really have no business being compared to each other. See, I've been a fan of Nintendo pretty much my whole life. My first video game experience ever was with the Nintendo 64, Diddy Kong Racing to be specific. I own pretty much every Nintendo console and handheld. I've got multiple variants of said handhelds. For God's sakes, I still own my Wii U. Who the fuck owns a Wii U anymore? And when the Switch was revealed in late 2016, I just had to have it. The pitch was fantastic back then too. A hybrid device that was both a handheld and a console, effectively allowing you to take your home console wherever you want, or plop your handheld system onto a TV and properly get footage of it. And I mean, being that kid who never left his house without his 3DS, you can see why the Switch appealed to me. But honestly, something's changed in the past few years. The flaws with both the Switch and Nintendo as a company are more in my face than ever before. And it's no secret that I have problems with Nintendo. I mean, I've made like, 3 or 4 videos now based on some of the hot water they got themselves in or some of the controversial shit they've been doing. And given all the stuff I've said about Nintendo in the past, I can confidently say that the Steam Deck is exactly what I've been wanting Nintendo to do with the Switch for the past 3 or 4 years now. But obviously this thing isn't gonna work for everybody. Do I think the Steam Deck is some grand Switch killer that's here to knock Nintendo down a few pegs? No, not really. The reason I'm making these connections is to give you context of what I already appreciate in the Switch, and how the Steam Deck expands upon that while making it a more open and PC-like environment. Because don't kid yourself, buddy. This thing's a PC, and it runs Linux. But before we talk about all that nerd shit and Linux stuff, why don't we talk about the hardware of the Steam Deck first? I'll be honest, I was a bit worried about the hardware of the Steam Deck, mainly because of this guy. We're having a lot of visual elements in this review today. Lots of stuff, lots of physical objects that we're drawing comparisons to. I will forgive you if you don't exactly know what the Steam controller is. And while it might look like your average, everyday video game controller, it's actually an ancient torture device that was crafted by Gabe Newell himself before he achieved his immortality. Just look at this man's beard. He's clearly a wizard. It's said that this ancient design was rediscovered by a rogue Valve employee after a failed attempt to try to steal some of Gabe's knife collection. Unfortunately, though, the tale does not end well for said employee. In the middle of trying to snatch some precious knives to sell on the CSGO black market, he was caught by Mr. Gabe himself. Now, as punishment for his insubordination, this rogue employee was sentenced by the Council of Valve to be the only dev who's still working on Team Fortress 2 to this very day. And you can still hear his screams in the deepest corners of 240. But then Gabe saw this design again after thousands of years of dormancy and said to himself, you know what'd be funny? Let's gaslight everybody into believing that this piece of shit's worth $60. I should also discuss what the Steam Machine was, because I'm gonna reference them a lot in this video, and some of y'all might not know what it is. The Steam Machines were Valve's original attempt at what would eventually become the Steam Deck. They were sort of a half-step between console and PC, and they were running on the first versions of Valve's Linux-based operating system, SteamOS. But again, we're gonna talk about Linux later, so I wanna get this history out of the way first. The idea was simple. Valve would work closely with big-name PC manufacturers and create custom, small form-factor systems that Valve would then sell directly on the Steam marketplace. And they'd also come with SteamOS by default, but you'd be able to install Windows on it if you really wanted to. There were versions by Alienware, iBuyPower, Origin PC, not the EA Games launcher, Gigabyte, Zotac, and honestly, so much more. It's kind of wild how many manufacturers got on board with the Steam Machine initiative. And honestly, at the time, it seemed like a good idea. Custom, low-cost systems that would have the benefits of both a console and a PC. So you'd get a clean, easy to use interface, a fully serviceable and upgradable system, and all of this is backed by some of the biggest names in PC gaming. The biggest issue with the Steam machines, however, is that they were a massive failure. Like, here's an excerpt from Ars Technica that said that the Steam machines were, quote, dead on arrival. Ouch. As far as I can tell, the reason the Steam machines failed was because of two main factors. First factor being Linux, which again, we're gonna talk about later, just be patient. And the second was that most people at the time didn't want this half step between console and PC. They wanted either a console or a dedicated at-home high-end PC. Now, I don't own a Steam machine, I never owned one, so I can't really give you personal experience on them, but I did have a friend who owned one. Now, I don't really talk to them anymore, but I do remember that they were insanely disappointed with their Steam machine. And they were like a capital G gamer, like this device was specifically made for them, and yet their Steam machine just ended up gathering dust and was rarely ever used. It's honestly kind of sad. Roughly 7 years after that initial disappointment, Valve decided, you know what? We're gonna make something good this time, and announced the Steam Deck. Finally, we're getting back to the main point of discussion in this video after, how many minutes? Fuck, whatever, let's just start talking about the hardware. The Steam Deck is just unironically at the top of my tier list of video game controllers. You got the 8BitDo Pro 2, you got the GameCube controller, and you got the deck. These three are my official, PAV-approved, crowned king of controllers. Kings? Multiple, yeah, the three kings. Like, if Valve made a standalone controller that was the Steam Deck, like replacing the screen and giving us all the trackpads and haptics and everything, I'd buy one. I'd buy two, honestly. Like, starting off with the D-pad, I thought the placement of it would cause some problems, but no, I can reach it just fine. And the trackpads, ooh, the trackpads are deceptively nice. See, I say deceptively because when the device is off and you're fiddling with the trackpads, they don't really feel like anything special. They just feel like two little trackpads with springs underneath them. But no, it's the software and the haptic feedback that gives it those satisfying, I don't really know what to call them. They're not really clicks, just that nice feedback. Like when you're using the left trackpad as a D-pad, because by default you can just do that. Like, it's deceptively nice feeling. Like, I didn't expect to like it as much, considering the Steam controllers trackpads were kinda finicky and hard to press, but gotta say, I'm a fan. And that's my point, right? It feels that Valve learned a lot of lessons on the Steam controller and expanded upon that, like with the new capacitive joysticks on the Steam Deck. I think these capacitive joysticks should be the new standard, like on every controller. Because think about it, you have new inputs on this thing that don't interfere with a traditional gamepad layout and don't resort to doing this weird fucking trackpad bullshit. And going hand in hand with these capacitive joysticks, gyro aim. I haven't talked about it in a while, but I'm gonna reiterate, I am a massive fan of gyro aim, and I genuinely think it should be the new standard and should be in every controller going forward. And the rear buttons, which can only be described as fucky. Now, if you're not familiar with keyboards, then you probably aren't familiar with the word thok. But let me just say, people spend thousands of dollars on their keyboards to make them sound exactly like these back buttons. And the Steam Deck even has a headphone jack. That means it's better than like any modern flagship smartphone. Bring back the headphone jack. Fuck you, Apple. And the deck even comes with a pretty, like, substantial carrying case. It's so good that notorious Linux hater Linus Sebastian was able to do this, and the deck inside was perfectly fine. There's also this nice, like, elastic band on the back that lets you hold stuff in this rear compartment. You can hold all kinds of things in it. You know, your charging cable, a TV dock, snacks, incriminating evidence, whatever you want. And the praise just keeps flooding in because the screen is also really good on this thing. Yeah, it's not an OLED, so the colors aren't as good as the Switch OLED, and the screen resolution's only 1200 by 800, but honestly, those things aren't really a big deal to me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would like to have an OLED screen in this, but, you know, keeps costs down, so I'm not exactly losing my mind over it. And at this size, the screen doesn't really feel low res, you know what I mean? Let's be honest, which would you rather have? 1080p display that you kind of can't notice it's 1080p at this size, or 60 FPS? And the cool thing about the software is that you can like force 30 frames a second on all your games just so you can squeeze out that little extra battery life. Cause yeah, the battery life on this thing ain't great. Like I get about 3 hours of Monster Hunter Rise at 60 FPS, which is understandable, but still a little disappointing. I mean, it was disappointing when the Switch had a 3-hour battery life, so, you know, I'm not gonna give it praise for having the same flaw. The only gripe I have, besides the light battery life, is the fact that the B button sticks occasionally. Like, more often than you'd expect. It gets pretty annoying. And if that's the only gripe I have after the past... Fuck, how late is this video again? I'd say the hardware is pretty good. And on top of all of that, on top of all the hardware stuff I've been talking about before, this thing is fully serviceable and fully repairable by the end user. Valve explicitly states that you should only repair the Steam Deck if you know what you're doing, and if you don't, just to hand it off to a professional and have them do it for you. But that pussy shit ain't stopping me, cause fun fact, I'm legally deaf. The fact that you have a massive company like Valve that's willing to trust people to open the devices that they purchased is a nice breath of fresh air. A sad, dystopian breath of fresh air, but a breath of fresh air regardless. Valve's even partnered with iFixit to sell replacement parts on their store. You can get batteries, control sticks, screens, entire shells. Like, if you could get a replacement motherboard on iFixit, I'm sure you could just build this damn thing yourself. But, you know, we'll just have to settle for a massive tech company doing the right thing and selling replacement parts instead of letting all their devices become just e-waste in a few years. Tragic, I know. By the way, like, wouldn't it be awesome if you could get upgraded motherboards for this thing? Like, I don't know what Valve's plan is with later revisions of the hardware, but I think that'd be pretty neat, like a framework kind of approach where you can just buy a replacement motherboard and swap in more powerful hardware later on down the line. Like, instead of buying Steam Deck 2, you can get Steam Deck 2 SoC and plop it in your Steam Deck 1. Like, that'd be cool, at least I think. I don't know if this is gonna happen, but I do know that the Steam Deck is pretty modular on the inside, and I can dream. But that's enough about hardware. Let's talk about the fun shit. Let's talk about Linux. As a Linux user myself, I think SteamOS 3.0 is a great step in the right direction. It turns the Steam Deck into a fully fledged PC with a highly configurable and easy to use console-like front end. Linux has a really bad track record with compatibility for games. So bad, in fact, that Valve had a pretty rough time getting devs to adopt their Steam machines. Valve essentially went to these devs and went, okay, yo, look, we got these cool PCs that try to bridge the gap between console and desktop. All you gotta do is remake all your games to work on this weird fucking operating system that less than 1% of all desktop PCs have. Pretty much every major developer in the PC gaming world went, nah, we're good. So Valve realized that they couldn't rely on other developers to get the job done. They needed a solution to this, I'm just gonna call it the Linux problem. See, if nobody uses Linux, devs won't port their games over. But if devs don't port their games over, then gamers will have little reason to try Linux. It's this chicken and egg scenario that eventually led Valve to implement their own version of something called Wine. It's something called a translation layer, and effectively, it translates all of the calls a Windows game would make into something that your Linux operating system can understand. I'll be completely honest and say that my understanding of this kind of stuff is pretty surface level, so I'm not really gonna go too much more in depth on this topic, but safe to say, it's pretty fucking cool. You have a Windows dedicated program that is running in Linux, that Linux is just in real time translating all the shit to make it work within Linux. Like, that's really cool. Look, I'm just some white kid on the internet who loves to play video games and wants to shit on Windows every opportunity they get. Like, I'm not an engineer, okay? Oh, and Valve calls this technology Proton. I feel like that's important. Wine was essentially the software base they started with, and then they kind of forked it off and made it into their own thing that they now call Proton. Wine and Proton are basically the same thing, it's just that one's more developed by Valve. It's just the world of open source software. I think Valve's ultimate goal is to completely remove their dependency on Windows. So, in the wise words of this random internet picture I found, if you want something done right, just do it yourself.
Yeah, and that's why I do all the editing myself.
Ha ha ha. And that's why Valve is shipping the Steam Deck with SteamOS 3. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, SteamOS 3? Where's SteamOS 1 and 2? Well, those were the versions of SteamOS that ran on the Steam machines. See how it all circles back around to that? These versions of SteamOS were running on top of something called Debian, which we're gonna need to talk about some Linux stuff here. And if you ever get confused, I've got this playlist up here in the top corner that goes over like a crash course of some basics in Linux. So if you ever get confused, reference this. Or just don't. Just be confused. I don't know, you're gonna ask me a question about this shit in the comments anyway, so I don't care. I don't give a shit. So SteamOS 1 and 2 were built off of a distro called Debian, but now version 3 runs off of a distro called Arch. They're all still Linux distributions, just built in slightly different ways. You don't need to understand the differences between Debian and Arch, but just know that the change from 2 to 3 was a pretty big change. And because all of this is just a flavor of Linux, the Steam Deck has a fully fledged desktop environment built in. You can connect monitors, keyboards, mice, all that kind of stuff, just like a normal PC. And here's a funny story, actually. I initially intended this entire review to be produced and edited entirely on the Steam Deck, like script writing and recording and editing and all that stuff just on this. While that would be a fun idea, I don't really want to completely redo my entire production process just for this one video. But I can definitely say that it's possible to do all of that stuff on Steam Deck. Because within the desktop environment, known as KDE Plasma, you can access something called a package manager. With this, you can browse, install, and manage your packages. Packages in this case being just files and programs and stuff like that. Like video and audio software, recording software, Minecraft, editing suites, other web browsers. Like so much is open to you. You can also theoretically install software via the terminal, but I never really got it to work. Okay, so now we have to talk about something that I know for a fact is gonna get all you gamers excited out there. Immutable root file systems. This is the biggest downside of the Steam Deck, at least coming from a Linux user. Okay, how do I explain an immutable file system? An immutable root file system basically means you can't change your system in any meaningful way. And that takes away one of the biggest reasons that a lot of people run Linux. On a normal Linux install, you'd have complete and total control over your entire system. But Valve is just kind of saying no. And they've decided to limit the amount of things I can do on my Steam Deck. But if someone using the Steam Deck doesn't know or doesn't care about Linux, it's honestly a really good safety net for them. Like, you don't need to worry about breaking your system or uninstalling your desktop environment by installing Steam. Like who would do that? You know, just accidentally uninstall their entire desktop. Just, And before Linux people start commenting, yes, I know it's technically possible to disable this immutable root, but any future update will just re-enable that immutable root and like undo all the changes you've made, so I just don't want to deal with it. Ultimately, the immutable root is a good thing for normal people. It's just a bit disappointing for Linux people. But that's not to say I've had a completely flawless experience with the deck. Like, sometimes the deck will just forget that I'm logged in and force me to re-input all my login credentials. This has happened to me several times. It's tapered off recently, but when I first got this thing, like every couple weeks, I would need to relog. Usually it's not that big of a deal, cause like, I don't really leave my house, so I'm always connected to the internet. But what happens if I'm not connected to Wi-Fi? Like, will I be unable to play the games on my Steam Deck? Do I need to log into some shady-ass McDonald's or Starbucks Wi-Fi just to play Stray? I haven't had this happen to me yet, but if you want updates on that, be sure to follow me on Twitter so that you know exactly when I get frustrated with my Steam Deck. God, I'm so fucking good at cross-promoting my social media. One time, my Steam Deck just completely fucking reset itself. And this was right after I beat a quest in Monster Hunter, so it was unable to save that I got all the rewards from that quest. That was annoying, and it reminded me in that moment that, oh yeah, Steam Deck's just a PC. And at the end of all this, that's the biggest praise and the biggest warning I can give about the Steam Deck. It's just a computer. and it has all the pros and cons that come with that. So if you're one of those people who's like really into PC gaming and you really like squeezing out every ounce of performance out of your hardware, then you'll love the Steam Deck. If not, you still have a really well-designed and easy-to-use front end, you just might not take advantage of all the Linux-focused features on this thing. And if you don't like it, then that's fine. Just stick with your Xbox or your Switch. The Switch is still a good device. I like this more. It's the meme. It's the fucking Top Gear meme. This is brilliant, but I like this. I understand why someone wouldn't want to get into PC gaming, but gotta say, this is a really good entry point for PC gaming. And honestly, it's the device I've been wishing for a while now. It's a complete modern gaming PC that also has all the comforts of a system like the Nintendo Switch. Simple and clean UI, great controls, portability, and the option to set it down and treat it like either a home system or a computer. The Steam Deck might be a niche device, but goddamn, I'm that niche. So it's working out for me just fine. Hey, thank you for watching this video. This video took way longer than I had anticipated it would take. I have no idea if this video will do well. I'm hoping it does well. So if you made it this far and you like what I do, hit the like, hit the bell, the subscribe, all the YouTuber shit. Just do all that stuff, because you genuinely, you have no idea how much that stuff helps. I also would like to give a big shout out to the patrons and the YouTube members, because hey, we have YouTube memberships now. They have been helping out a lot, especially since, you know, I haven't really been releasing content. I would like to release more, but you know, real life gets in the way a lot of the time. So thank you again to the patrons. You guys help me out more than you could imagine, and it really, really means a lot. And just you watching the video, like, it really means a lot that you made it this far, but I'm rambling. Thank you for watching. I am going to go inside a dark hole and sleep. Okay, good night.